Good morning. Hello. Welcome, everyone. My name's Mel Luymes, and I'm with OPACA. So this is the right in the middle. We're the third of five of this series on just looking at very specific types of manure. And we're doing this so that we can avoid generalities and speak. We're just talking about liquid hog manure today, so we can get into the specifics. And we're also keeping it really practical by having like on-farm experience. We've got a farmer on every call. We have a farmer and an agronomist or a nutrient management planner and a manure applicator. And then we've got manure girl herself, Christine Brown, and then we're going to hear an update from Soil and Crop at the end of it. So welcome. And if you're wondering what is Timing Matters, it is an industry-wide initiative, a partnership here between all these commodity groups and OMAFRA. And the goal is to promote, obviously, good timing of manure application. And timing matters because there's a lot of value in manure, and that's what we'll be talking about today. It's also promoting like different storage options and different application equipment. So this is coordinated by Farm and Food Care, but also here we are, OPACA, which is one of the newest acronyms in agriculture, the Ontario Professional Ag Contractors Association, and we represent the contractors that apply manure in the province. So we're also promoting good stewardship there. And yeah, head over to the Timing Matters website where you can learn more about manure management. So this morning's agenda, we're going to hear from John de Bruyn, who's a farmer in Oxford County. Then Andy de Vries is from CropQuest, but also a farmer that buys a lot of manure. So it's got some great perspectives. Cliff Horst is with Country Custom Ag near Shakespeare, and also a board member of OPACA. And then we'll hear from Chris Brown from OMAFRA, followed up by Angie Straathof. John de Bruyn, take it away.
All right. Good morning, Melissa, and thanks for the opportunity, I guess, to speak from the pork industry's perspective. So, my name is John de Bruyn, and this is the people that matter to me, I guess. And currently, 6 out of the 8 of those people have been locked in the same house here for most of the winter, and we're getting a bit of cabin fever, as I imagine many of you are also experiencing. So, I'm not sure if less is better when you're in a pandemic, but there's advantages and disadvantages, I guess, to being 6 of us. So
no kidding. I hope they're still smiling, though.
The beginning of the day, generally. By the end of the day, it's not so much. So our farm here is located in the southern part of Oxford County. Operate as J. de Bruyn Farms Limited. So we have our sows and weaners at one location, and we've got various finishing barns at other locations in the neighborhood. And if I focus on the crop side, I guess our crop rotation is corn, soybeans with winter wheat, and followed with a cover crop on the winter wheat. And so I wouldn't say we're no-till farmers, but we haven't used a plow or a chisel plow in quite a few years. So the corn crop is after beans, and so manure application, and then we till it before we put the corn in. Soybeans are no-tilled into the corn stalks, and the winter wheat after soybeans, also with the manure application as before we plant. So there's kind of the general cropping trend. Manure samples, we do them about every other year, I think, on most of the tanks we have, and soil samples we try and get every 3 years, and we do own all our own manure application equipment. So move on to the next slide. I think some of the application, what's important for my farm, I guess, or our farm, I think as a pork producer, adequate storage is key. Now, that's the only way you get the flexibility that you that's flexibility just gives you all kinds of options. And so I think if you're a beginning farmer, maybe it's difficult to start with adequate storage, but I think as you make your plans, when you're building your barns or when you're doing expansions, if you're, for example, if you're building a finishing barn and 8 feet of storage underneath is good, maybe 10 feet is better, right? Just give you some flexibility. So I think the other thing that I think that our farm does, I think that's important, is we've got water meters in every barn. I make the staff write down the water usage every day in every barn, just so that I know they've looked at the water, because of course, the water not working in a barn is a big issue. But I think sometimes it alludes to maybe some leakage or a breakdown that you haven't seen, and you'd be amazed at how much water can go through a system when you don't want it. And it just leads to better management, knowing how much water each location is using. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. If there's any questions on that, I think some of the other important things I think is, manure pumps are expensive, but I think we do need you need a decent pump for good agitation. Same thing, it gives you the flexibility, it gives you a consistent product when you're applying your manure, and it helps you because manure doesn't do it all. Sometimes you need to add some fertilizer, and just consistency of product is maybe one of the negatives of manure over fertilizer. And so by giving a good stir, you get a consistent product. So and I think I'm interested in Cliff's comments later on in his presentation, but I think all pork producers know that compaction can trump any nutrient advantage we've got with our nutrients. So we really got to be cognizant of the compaction, especially in the springtime. And I think the other realization that Chris Brown will probably talk about later is that no matter how good a job you do, you still need to consider additional nitrogen for growing the corn crops in this part of the world. So with that, I guess our strategy, so in the spring, we apply all our nutrients with the drag hose system. So we focus on the land that's a little closer to the barns. That happens to be our sow weaner location there, which has got a pit out back. In the summer after wheat, it's a great time, I think, to get out there. Compaction isn't as much an issue, so we may use the drag hose, we may use the tanker, and the cover crops is something we've added in the last few years. That oat crop can be quite a nice little crop after wheat. It's a great way to apply nutrients and get some organic matter growing. And whether you harvest the cover crop or not, I think is still debatable, I think, but I think it's a great use of that sunshine and that nice period of time to get some work done. And then fall, I guess maybe as late as you can in the fall, as the science will tell you, we almost always use the tanker in the fall, and that's when we go to our further locations. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of time, but it's important, I think, that the nutrients get where they need to be. And with doing that in the fall, it doesn't tie up that important springtime, right? So that's when late summer and fall is a time to do the greater distances. And then one of the options I do have is we do have a tank at a location where there's no barns. So the land is there, the manure tank is there. We built it many years ago. And so in the middle of winter, sometimes when the roads are nice and frozen, we have an opportunity to transfer manure from a barn to a manure tank that's sitting there ready for spring application. So there's kind of our strategy for that. What's the next slide? So there's our drag hose set up. Everybody I think knows what they look like. For us, we did try a few years of in putting it in the ground, and it wasn't perfect for us. We've gone back to applying over the surface in the springtime. Sometimes we fluff up the ground a little bit. Sometimes it's straight into the soybean stubble. We were aware that we lose the nitrogen, but I think we just get a better spread pattern. I'm interested in the other speakers now and their opinion on that. We weren't able to perfect the in-row or putting it in the ground, and it still took a long time to dry up. So with this, you still got to wait for the drying, and we try and work it in as soon as possible after application. I think some of the advantages of the drag hose is continuous spreading. I think you can get a very even spread pattern on a farm, but it takes a bit of math and a bit of thinking to lay them out, as you know. And with our setup, we can do 100 acres plus in one setup. Certainly, I think it's the answer to compaction challenges in the spring. And, then back to your tire inflations, you can really set the tires up really good on these tractors if they're only in the field. But you are limited to distance. So, of course, the faraway farms, across the road farms are not possible to do with the drag, or not as easy to do with the drag hose system. And I think the other thing that you got to recognize is, yeah, you can automate it maybe, but for us, it's a two-person job. So whenever you're drag hosing, there's two people tied up. And that's not that bad driving around your gator for the afternoon, but it is a two-person job. And remember, sometimes you got to go in the barn and pull slides and all that other stuff. So between all of it, you need two people focused on it. And I think maybe some of the negatives to drag hoses, everything's got to work. I mean, if you got to have everything in shape. If one thing isn't working, the whole system shut down, and time ticks, right? If you're doing 600 gallons a minute, you can look at your watch every minute you're not going, there's manure not being applied. I think the other one I've already mentioned, waiting for the ground to dry after application does delay your planting, no question about it. So you've got that balance of, manure applied in the spring is always better because the crop's ready for it, but how much time can you allow that to allot to that, considering you need to let it still dry, as opposed to the fall application, which makes better use of your time and lots of equipment. So that you need for drag hose, including, you know, a commercial air compressor and a gator or something to get around is handy. And you better have your tools ready and a bunch of spare seals for hoses and all that kind of stuff. So on to the next slide, Mel. And so we also have a tanker. This is one we just received or purchased about a year ago. And so I think one of the advantages there is you can set that up and one person can work away at it, right? Tire pressure is still important. I think if you're just field applying, you know, it's great. There's some systems there where you can increase and decrease the tire pressure. We don't have that. There is maybe a disadvantage on the long run where you got to balance the tire pressure for the road with the tire pressure for the field. But I think by the same token, you can, with a wider window in the fall and late summer, you can pick your window for application. So certainly good for the fields further from storage. As this picture shows, we use it for off-season transfers. I think a couple other issues that maybe are unique to, well, one's unique to swine, I guess, is sometimes you get foaming in manure pits, and you know, a 5,000 gallon tank under the right conditions might only have 4,000 gallons in there too. And when you're going a long distance, that can be frustrating, I guess is the right word for it. And I think you always got to watch for buildup of solids inside tanks as well. And so there's all kinds of systems to beat that. We're not, I guess we're lucky maybe we don't play in the sandbox with the dairy guys who are always challenged by sand, and sand can be a real abrasive and challenging thing. But even in swine operations, I think some of the grit can build up in your tank on you. And, you know, same thing, a 4,000 or a 5,000 tank can quickly become a 4,000 tank if you don't maintain things. So next slide. Yeah, so there's my short summary. I thought there's a picture that I took last year that kind of sums up the anticipation of spring. I think there's the three smells put together. I think that all farmers can recognize. And I'm a little bit of a sucker for lilac, so I thought that was a nice question there. So with that, I'm looking forward to the rest of the presentations, and we'll be able to answer questions either now or whenever, or we can go through some presentations first, whichever Mel would like.
Yeah. Oh, no, thanks so much, John. This is great. Chris was just wondering in the chat, like, do you have a solution to prevent or control the foaming?
I don't know if there's one solution. I think there's been several. I'm interested. Maybe some of the other people on the call have solutions. It depends is a big factor, I guess. So when you're drag hosing, that foaming issue maybe isn't as important, right? But when you're tankering, it can be a real negative. And I think for those that have under barn storage, it can be a danger as well. So there has been instances where the foaming is actually just on its own come up through the slats in a barn. So it's an issue. I don't know if there's one solution yet, but I'm interested to hear from the group. I think there may be some old wives' tales out there and some other people that may have products that have worked for them, but I haven't found one thing that works for me yet. Yeah.
Cliff, did you have a suggestion?
I was just going to make a comment. It should probably be environmentally friendly. Like used oil is probably not a good idea.
No, yes. Right. So an environmentally friendly solution to prevent foaming. We've got another question. Do you apply all manure to your own fields?
That's a good question. So so all our fields get manure. My brother's a cash cropper. He used to be my partner. So most of the land that he still crops is also part of my nutrient management plan. So some of that being next door and some of that being a little further away as some of mine is. So yeah, I use more land than I currently own and crop myself.
Excellent. If there's not any other questions, yeah, we'll move on and come back to you later. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Okay. Next up, we've got Andy Vries. He's a farmer and partner with CropQuest. They write nutrient management plans all across Ontario. And Andy buys a lot of manure, so we're going to hear his thoughts.
Okay, good morning. Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Mel, for this opportunity. I spoke yesterday on the dairy sector, and I'm probably better voiced in the pork sector because where I live, it's all a lot of pork production. I'm just south of Mitchell, and so we buy hog manure and broiler manure and some digestate from a dairy farm. So I'd like to speak more on the value of manure to a cropping operation than actual nutrient management. If you're a progressive pork producer in Ontario today, you've likely got a plan already, and you know what that's all about. And actually, I'm more involved in the non-ag source side of things than the ag source. So I just want to speak about the value of manure to our operation. We farm south of Mitchell with my brother and my sons and his son-in-law, and we're in a 10-mile radius of there, just south of Mitchell there. So there's lots of hog operations there, and so the value of manure right off the top, I think the highest extraction of value from manure can be reached when you put manure on the lowest testing P and K farms. That's where you get the biggest bang for your dollar. So we do almost all our manure application after wheat harvest, of course. We get right after the combine, we usually have a no-till drill following the combine, sowing oats, and then we apply manure right after that. And the fibrous root factor of the cereal crop ties up a lot of the nutrients, and it's just a real good program. And like John said, you can get one nice crop of green feed after that if that's what you're looking for. We've never sold the green feed off the farms. We like to till it right back in. But if you're a livestock operation, sometimes it's a good option for there. So how we determine the value of manure is almost always it gets trucked to a farm with a nurse tank on the side of the road, and we'll pump out of there from a drag hose system. So the way we value every time we're pumping, we'll extract or take a sample every hour out of the nurse tank, and at the end of the day, we'll make a 5-gallon pail or half a 5-gallon pail samples, composite sample, and we take a sample from that and take that to the lab and get the value of that. So then we can tell exactly how many actual pounds of potash and phosphorus that we're applying, and it's really important to do that because as John knows, when we're pumping out of an early wean system, there's a lot of washing goes on, a lot more water, so we can't actually put that on trucks and haul it anywhere. It has to be, you have to be close by to drag hose out to a farm next door, or we have to be next door to it, something like that. It's pretty hard to truck that and extract enough value. So that's from an early wean system. And there's such variation in finishing barns. Like at one time we were buying out of a 2,000 head finishing barn, and they weren't managing their drinkers properly. And by the time we were all done, we were getting about $25 an acre worth of nutrients when we calculated everything out. So it was not cost effective at all. So that's and then the complete opposite end of that screen, we have another hog finishing operation on the other side is 3,000 head finishing barn. And they use a liquid feeding system, and they use steep baits out of the ethanol plant as a carrier in their liquid feeding system. And that's almost pure potash. So when we put on 5,000 or 6,000 gallons to the acre on a farm with that material, we're paying upwards of $200 an acre to get that applied. And we have no problem with that because that's all the nutrients we need for the next 3 years. It's extremely available with the steep bait potash. So that the other option we use, if the weather allows, we have a large boiler producer closer to Stratford. I buy manure out of their operation, and if we get the opportunity that late April 20th or something like that, we'll go to flat ground, and we'll put broiler manure on the last possible freeze if it comes late enough. You have to be ready for that because you got to start at 3 in the morning, and we have a great operator at a Seaforth who does that. He has a weigh scale on his payloader, so we know exactly the tonnage that we're buying out of there. He just gives us a report when he's done on how many tons he's picked up and spread. So that's kind of the round view of how we utilize manure in our neighborhood, and we've done it for a long time. And I think because we're in an area where edible beans are grown. I think the highest, one of the highest values we can extract from manure is, just to put it in simple terms, if you look at your ticket on your premix tags or bags or bulk bags or whatever, and you look at the micronutrients on that, realizing that it goes through the hog operation. When that feed goes through the hog operation, the hog is only extracting about 30% of those micros that is going through the operation. So the rest is it's added right to the manure. And that's really where the value is when we're growing edible beans. You just can't beat it. I don't know why edible beans respond to it so well, but they do. And it really, it allows us to keep our soil in good shape. So I'll just go with questions from here, if that's okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
Yeah, feel free, anyone to... Oh, go ahead.
The nutrient price table. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my question. Is how did you come to that, and would cash croppers really pay that?
I don't know. We have quite a few people use our nutrient price list on our website for pricing manure when they're selling it to neighbors or whatever. So that's just something I came up with. We needed to value our own manure that we're buying. So I contact 4 suppliers in a 3-county area and basically asked them for a price on April the 1st, what they would charge for NP and K per actual unit for an operation of 400 to 500 acres. That's kind of an average size. And we use that, and then we use it as a rolling average. And I can tell you that the average for 2021, April 1st, 2021 is going to be higher than what you see there now. That's for sure. I expect to see that the nitrogen up at least 12 cents. Yeah, 20% I would expect across the board. Crop prices are high, so that's a green light for the input guys to jack it up a little bit. So. Everybody knows that game. So.
I know. Yeah. How far, and I guess this is maybe a question for Cliff too later, but how far have you seen manure move off a farm to a cash cropper?
That's a good question. So we have a pretty good idea what the NP and K, well, for us, we don't factor in the nitrogen because we're applying after wheat. So we're paying, we only pay on the P and K values. And if you're, like I said, an early wean operation, you can't go very far. If you're a finishing operation that's just a dry feeding system with wet dry feeders, I think you can probably go 6 to 7 kilometers one way or 14 round trip. This other stuff that we can go further with it. But I would say on average for the average finishing barn, you can probably, with a tanker truck and a nurse tank, you can extract pretty good value, 7 to 8 kilometers round trip. These guys that are doing a lot of this, they're well organized, and they're pumping about 60,000 gallons an hour. They're well set up. So, but a truck is $140 an hour. So that's,
you do gotta do some math first.
for sure.
We've got a question here from Colin. Are there micronutrients that you would apply on top of the hog manure for edible beans?
I think there's a misunderstanding there that micronutrients is in the manure.
But would there be any more that you would need, or do you think that's completely sufficient?
No, the only time we would add a micronutrient would be sulfur on the wheat. That's
okay.
Other than that, no. It's just no, we don't.
That you wouldn't need anything more. And no. Colin, that was the question, right? Was it additional? Yep. Okay. Thanks. Excellent. All right. Thank you so much.
Now, I'm learning how to. I can't get my chat to send my question, but the question is the manure applied to the edible crop in the year it's grown or the previous year in order to get around the excess nitrogen, or what is the nitrogen needs for edibles?
The nitrogen need for edibles. So when we're doing edible beans, if we can get it, the perfect the perfect recipe for edible beans. We have one farm that has a nursery barn across the road. And if we apply 3,500 gallons of nursery barn manure to edible beans, that gives us about 50 units of actual N, and that's perfect. That's what we would apply. So, but you can't go that far with nursery barn manure. It's just the composition isn't high enough, but it's a perfect additive for edible beans because it has the right amount of nitrogen and the micros. And I think, I'm not a hog producer, but I think the utilization of the micros is even lower on nursery pigs than it is on finishing hogs. So I can't actually speak to that, but I'm a certified crop advisor, not a nutritionist, so I don't know.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Martin, and nice to see you. Next up, we've got Cliff Horst. Getting the job done right. We really want to hear from a contractor with lots of experience getting this all applied. What's the best way from an environmental perspective and economic? And Cliff runs Country Custom Ag right around the Shakespeare area, but I wonder how far of a radius would you go out to do some work, Cliff?
Oh, we don't go that far. Probably 30 kilometers would be.
Okay. You got all your business within. Excellent. Well, you also do a lot of other custom work too. Is that
Yes.
right? Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, take it away, Cliff. We're going to hear more.
Good morning, and it's a privilege to be on this call this morning. So my brother and I have been running Country Custom Ag, and it's a business that we run together. I enjoy working with family, and it's good almost all the time. So I would like to talk a little bit about manure, obviously, and how important timing matters is. I think I'm talking mostly to hog farmers. So I think a lot of you have probably had the experience of a full manure pit when it wasn't full, maybe a late one when it wasn't to be full, maybe
Right.
where that dragged on, and all at once you find yourself in the position where you have a full tank, and there's more manure keeps flowing into that tank out of the barn. And what do? The temptations there is to do some winter spreading, some spreading when you should not be on the ground. And I think when I look around the area, I see more and more equipment that could be utilized more, such as a picture of this truck that we have in front of us now. That's what we call our manure transfer trailer. It's an efficient way to move manure. There's a good chance there is a manure pit close to you somewhere that's not being utilized, that's not full, that someone would be happy to have some nutrients. This trailer here is a self-unload unit, has a 30-foot boom on it. That trailer unloads in about 3 minutes, so it doesn't take very long to pump off 8,000 to 10,000 gallons. And we found it very helpful in our operation. We go into pits to transfer manure, and we also go directly into tanker by the side of the field. That's one of the reasons for the longer boom, so we can reach across the ditches. So it's been a good tool. Now I'd like to talk about different ways to apply manure, which I'm sure you're all familiar with them. This is a Tiltec injector, and certainly injection has been a challenge and is a challenge, like we heard about earlier. But I have found the Coulter injectors to take away a lot of those challenges. You can go on to the next slide, Mel.
A better picture. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, there we are applying, and notice where we are applying. That is right next to Shakespeare, actually right behind the pork shop. I'm sure most of you know where that location is. And no complaints whatsoever for smell there. Going into a cover crop after wheat, it's a beautiful time to inject manure, I think. One thing we are playing with a little bit is planting back into those strips. That planter set up on that injector is set up on 30-inch spacing, and it depending how hard you run it, how deep you run it, it can do a fair bit of tillage, as you see in this slide. We also apply Listagrow as well, which is a non-ag source, and it has worked very well for us on that. That's about 8. If you go back,
let me know. I'm probably going too fast. Thanks, Cliff.
Maybe go back one slide. That's about 8,000 gallons an acre of wiener manure there. We're playing with different applications and basically nothing whatsoever on top. That strip will be a little bit soggy, but in 12 hours or so, that manure has very much just soaked in. Okay, next slide. Are we frozen up? There we are. Oh. And yes, okay. So the other year I had the privilege, actually next slide, sorry.
Okay.
The other year I had the privilege of going to Germany to Agritechnica, and I enjoyed it immensely, and I learned a lot. I did not have enough time. I highly recommend it. If you can get your brother to do the fall work, the corn harvest, and then just take off and go to Agritechnica. It's well worth it. I was just utterly amazed at the amount of manure application equipment that is there. It is just unbelievable. And they call this a grassland injector. You can go on to the next slide. And it's a tool that I think we should see more of here in Ontario. Can you imagine we spread manure for some dairy farmers onto their hay ground? We have to get there with hog manure right after they cut it, almost right after the hay's off, or else we burn the alfalfa. You could go into with a unit like this here after the alfalfa has started growing, and if you do a good job, it does not burn, is what I'm told. Another place where I would love to try this is going on wheat, winter wheat in the spring before while it's still dormant, if conditions allow, you get a very even spread. I think it would be a great tool to have. You can go to the next slide. Does very little disturbance, as you see. So I really think that it'll be a great tool. Next slide. That's the actual injector, I guess you'd call it. That one's a double disc. Very simple. One concern I had as I talked to suppliers over there, manufacturers in Germany, was maintenance. And I don't know if any of you are used to running a high-speed disc, but it's the same type of bearing assembly on a high-speed disc, and you hardly ever replace any of those bearings. Next slide. Okay, next thing I want to talk a little bit about is tires and inflation systems, compaction. It's a huge deal with manure, like John mentioned earlier, and I don't think we utilize the technology that we could here in Ontario. I really enjoy it. Know your tires. That's important. You take a radial tire, which you think is a good tire. Did you know that there's a radial tire that's an IF and there's a radial tire that's a VF? And from a standard radial tire to an IF, you can carry 20% more weight with 20% with the same air pressure. A VF, it's 40% more weight with the same air pressure, or 40% less air pressure. Next slide. That unit there is sitting, the highest tire pressure is 13 PSI. That does very little damage in the field. The times are past where the fields that we tank, even in the spring before corn, that we actually see tanker tracks, except for, of course, at the beginning where at the gate where you're always driving. But next slide. It's interesting, compaction. It's a really interesting thing. I also sit on a compaction committee, so I really enjoy this. And notice that, actually go to the previous slide, Mel. Notice that the tire pressure here is, next one. Tire pressure is 50%. Yeah. That's
50 PSI.
My opinion, 50 PSI. No one should be entering a field with a tire at 50 PSI in these days anymore. Even 30 PSI or even 20. I really question it. Next slide. I won't go into these slides much at all, but it's really interesting the work that the compaction committee is doing on that, and I think OMAFRA is doing a really good job in that, spending some money, and it's very helpful. The other
And
thing
note,
is,
this only had the 2 tires, not the 8 or
right.
10. Yeah.
That's right. This is only a entire tanker, and I don't remember what size it was and all that anymore. But
Yeah.
it's very interesting research that's being done, and I'm excited. Maybe once COVID is passed, the compaction committee wants to look at what next study would be to see what draft does as far as compaction. So you take a dragline system that's pulling really hard with the tractor. What does draft do as far as compaction? Next slide. And put a little bit of little talk about OPACA here. When you need a contractor, there is a lot of contractors out there. Here's a way you can find somebody that will do a good job for you and somebody in your area. So just go to opaca.net.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cliff. We've got a question from Benny about applying in crop. Oh no, with a drag hose in crop. Is there a lot of crop damage? Have you tried that, or anyone else have experience with that?
I have never done that.
There's been some work done. One of the contractors, of course, I can't remember his name just when I need to, has done a lot of work with drag hose in corn, has figured out how to set the hoses so that he gets the maximum amount of area with each. Why can't I remember? Larry Behringer from near.
Yeah.
He does probably the most, but there's other contractors that also do some, and there's more and more farms that are also they're planting their crop at the right time and then going in sometime between planting and side dress to put on their manure. And there's not very much crop damage as long as you're going in before the 4th collar on the corn. Once it gets to 5th collar, you start getting a lot more damage. Mm-hmm. Glenn Arnold in Ohio has done quite a bit of work on this, and he's done yields, and he's seen increased yields when he's drag hosed, especially pig manure, into corn. Pig manure works better than dairy just because of the availability of the nitrogen.
Okay. And Calvin was reflecting on wanting to put it into organic wheat. Any thoughts on that from anyone?
Definitely the challenge there is to get an even spread.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that one of those grassland injectors would be ideal.
Mm-hmm. And Dave put in the chat here too that he has drag hosed on winter wheat, very little damage. But yeah, you need to get in pretty early.
We did some in-crop manure application into wheat at Bloxage farm years ago with the airway, and it was his idea, and it was April the 21st. It was starting to elongate, and I was really nervous that we were going to do a lot of damage, but ended up doing very little damage at all. The only place you could see any damage was the tire tracks.
Wow.
We've tried.
Oh, Martin?
We've tried a couple of years here on corn, and timing is key. We did one field for ourselves and got away with it. It worked out fine. We went to a neighbor's field a couple of days later, and the corn was just too high and it all snapped. And it was
wow.
So it's really, if you're planning on having to do it in that time frame, best to go a little bit earlier than late, because if it gets too tall, you're out of options. With at least we were drag hosing, so.
Okay. Anyone else's experience with that on the call?
John, was that corn that you tried it in once as well?
Yes, it was corn. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to want to try to plant on time, because we're no-till or strip-till, and it's going to be better for us to get the fertilizer there rather than putting it on up front, delay planting, and then losing more at the end, I think.
Dave, any more about your experience? You're just hiding on the chat, aren't you? Dave had a comment about foaming.
Here, I just turned my mic on. Can you hear me?
There, yeah, I was just gonna wait awkwardly until you. There
Yes,
you are.
I was trying to make you feel awkward. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, we've done drag hosing on winter wheat. Yeah, like I said, I've never tried corn. Don't think I ever would. But the winter wheat, just get in early, and no, not too early. Not when it was frozen, but before it gets too tall that you're not flattening it. You see a little damage on the headlands when you're turning, depending on how hard you crank that steering wheel on the headland with the twisting of the tires. It's an operator thing, but yeah, I've had great luck. The wheat responds well. We do it whenever we can.
Yeah, we should have got Larry on the call, Chris, because he'd sorted all the drag hose issues out.
Very innovative.
Yeah. No, well worth checking him out. Dave, what about your comment on foaming? What products you're using, and anyone else? Oh, you're still on mute. Start at the beginning again.
Sorry. We've used canola oil in the past. That works well, just a small amount to put in the pit while stirring at the beginning. The transitional pipe carts I find work well, going from the 8-inch to the 10-inch at the top helps. And then we use a product called Actina, which we get from a local guy. It comes out of the States, a manure actifier, liquid actifier. I don't know what the word is. We put in the pits, and that's helped a lot too. So just what we've noticed.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you.
I would definitely second that. Pumping, if your pump's a 10-inch pump, use a 12-inch discharge. If you got an 8-inch pump, use a 10-inch discharge. It just slows the flow down, and it does not foam as much.
Okay. Good to know. Okay, well, we're gonna transition to hold on to your hats, because you're about to learn about agri-sweets. Unless there's another question in the chat. How much canola oil? Calvin asks.
Jeff Bannerman. On foaming, I got a customer that I work with on a product up at Teeswater that they spread waste out of Chapman's material, and they have a lot of problem with foaming. And they get a product out of Ecolab, he said, but I don't know the detail on the exact name of it. And they have to add it every time when they go to spread, because he gets a lot of foaming out of it. But I could find out what exactly it is and send it through. So.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Jeff. And we did have Andy, this is a question for you from Dennis about what is steepate?
Yeah, I saw that question. So I'm not a nutritionist. I just know this. I can find that out exactly what that is, but I know it's the liquid after the ethanol making process. It's the liquid, and it's full of potash. Maybe Christine would have a better idea on that. I just know that a steepate is in the ingredient in their feed ration, and that's what makes the potash value so high. I'm not exactly sure how that all works in the ethanol making process. Do you have any idea, Chris?
We did some analysis when Dawn was an issue to try and figure out what the
right.
and applied, and I have some analysis that I can share. I'll look for them after I finish my presentation, because I can't remember off the top.
Can't do it right now?
No, can't do it right now.
You've got something else going on right now?
Oh,
okay. So Chris is, not a lot of us have heard of or used AgriSuite, but this is some software that is super helpful that you get to play with. And Chris is going to show us just what's out there for us to work with in terms of resources. Thanks, Chris. Take it away.
Thanks, Mel. It's been really great discussion when I hear just the the increase in interest in manure and the value of that manure and putting it in the right place. So this is just a tool that helps to increase that application value from a dollar value, but also from a timing and placement value. So next slide. So the home screen of the AgriSuite, the new AgriSuite, gives you the tools that are currently available. And in April, we will also have the manure storage and sizing tool, but it's available in phone, tablet, or computer, English or French, metric, imperial, US units that you can change on the go. The first calculator, it's a standalone. It just does like simple calculation. You get your soil test and yield input, and it gives you the nutrient requirements based on that soil test and nitrogen recommendations, and also the crop removal. So it's a two-step process that's very handy in trying to figure out what is the right application rate, especially when soil fertility levels are on the high side. The organic amendment calculator, you have an analysis or a database. It gives you the approximate nutrients in that manure, and then based on management, how much of those nutrients are available based on timing and incorporation details. The fertilizer calculator, if you know what the manure is providing, but you need a little bit of supplemental fertilizer, the fertilizer calculator lets you blend fertilizer sources or just add different sources. The phosphorus loss calculator, the last of the standalone calculators at this point, and it basically lets you compare management practices like timing and application along with the field characteristics to give an idea of how much potential phosphorus loss is there. These four calculators get put together in the field management plan, and the field management plan just basically looks at crop, field and crop rotation and application of the different nutrients to give an idea of what is the balance of those nutrients, especially looking at a rotation basis. Next slide. This is a screenshot of the crop nutrient tool. You put in your county, township, the soil test information, your planned crop, nutrient credits, if there's any from alfalfa or red clover, and your yield goal. And what it gives you is your production recommendations based on that soil test and nitrogen recommendations, and your crop removal. Information icons, we try and keep everything looking simple so that it's relatively easy to use. There's information icons that give additional information like the corn calculator for nitrogen recommendations and a breakdown of those. Next slide. This is a screenshot of the organic amendment calculator, and what you put in is your manure type, and there's a lot of different options in a drop-down list. Then your manure analysis, either an actual analysis or using the database, and then the management details like the application timing. Is it spring? Is it fall? Is it hopefully not winter? And then what is the incorporation details and your application rate? And what you get is your available nutrients based on the application timing and incorporation, and then based on application rate, the total nutrients that are applied to the farm. And here you've got a lot of information icons. So Mel, next slide. So
yeah, forgot.
Available nitrogen, so how much of that ammonia is available based on your practices, and how much of the organic nitrogen is considered available. Phosphorus, we've changed it in the new AgriSuite compared to the old AgriSuite. Old AgriSuite used to show just the 40% available, but most people have adequate soil tests or too high soil tests in some cases. And so we're showing the 40% with an information icon that says if your soil test is really, really low, you're not going to get full availability right away, but within the first couple of months, most of that phosphorus is going to be available. An information icon on the trace elements, go back a bit. If you put in the trace elements from your analysis or even from the database, it gives an idea of what is those trace elements and organic matter. And you see quite a bit of difference in fair to finish, where it's low dry matter versus some of the solid manures in that organic matter and sulfur as well. Estimated economic value. This one's kind of neat. It's always been there, but it's been in the background. Here we're giving a economic value after application. So we put in default values in the field management plan. You can change those default values, but we get a total estimated economic value of N, P, and K. And if you're not using the N like Andy said, then you take that one out. This is important because it gives an economic value, but you only get this economic value if you're actually putting it to a field that needs those nutrients. If we've got high fertility levels and the field isn't going to be able to use those nitrogen, or sorry, the phosphorus and the potash for years and years and years, then you're better to sell those nutrients to a cash crop farm and get those dollars for the manure trading. Next slide. And then this is just a summary slide of the field management plan because it would take me too long to show you all the details. What I've done is I've put in a corn, soybean, wheat rotation. I've added the manure in the spring ahead of the corn, or yeah, ahead of the corn. Soybeans doesn't get any nutrients. Winter wheat is just getting the nitrogen. And what I tried to show here is how do we look at the balance instead of just looking at one crop at a time and what the nutrient balance is. Let's look at the full rotation and see, okay, how much manure can we apply over that rotation? And what is the additional supplemental fertilizer that might be required? So in this case, with the farrow to finish, this is a database average for farrow to finish. We would need about 6,000 gallons to meet the rotation phosphorus crop removal. We would need some additional potash at that rate. And we, one of the new features in the new AgriSuite is we've got our agronomic recommendations, we've got our crop removal, but we also have a hybrid. And that hybrid is the crop removal for phosphorus and potash, but the crop nitrogen recommendations for corn and for soybeans. Because if we look at soybeans, they might remove 200 pounds of nitrogen, but they really don't need it because the nodules will do that for us. So by using the hybrid version, we don't get a nitrogen recommendation, but we do get the P and K removal. Next slide. So I did the same thing for sows, and for sows, again, if we look at the average from the database, we get an idea of what the nutrient value is. And take a look here at a 5,000 gallon per acre spring incorporated. Our economic value is after application is only about $29 per acre, which if you look at the finisher manure is quite a bit less. And we all know that, of course. Next slide. So if we were applying that sow manure, it would take about 13,000 gallons per acre using the same rotation to meet that phosphorus crop removal. And again, we would need some additional nitrogen, but not quite as much. Next slide. If we did that for the finisher manure, instead of $28 per acre, it's almost $100 more per acre. And that's assuming that we're using all the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash in places that we need it, but quite a bit more value in that finisher manure. And if we were using finisher manure in that rotation, next slide, it would take about 4,500 gallons to meet our phosphorus crop removal. Again, we would need additional potash. And the reason that I'm focusing on phosphorus removal is because really we shouldn't be applying all our nitrogen to any crop because of availability or potential loss. There should always be a commercial source as well. And especially since we don't want to put all our nitrogen on because then we would be increasing our phosphorus levels too much. But with most of the manures in our database and most of the analysis that I've seen, most crops need additional potash over that rotation to not have that soil test go down. And then the last point I'd like to make about this balance slide is that if your soil test levels are low, then sometimes it's okay to have more phosphorus added. Like if you've got my farm where I've got phosphorus levels below 10 in some places, yeah, I would like to add more phosphorus and build that test. For most hog operations, the soil test for phosphorus is quite high. So we really do over that rotation want to try and balance that phosphorus. Next slide. The agronomic comparisons that we can do with AgriSuite, looking at management differences on both the value of the nutrients, available nutrients, and the economic value, but also on the phosphorus index. So here I'm comparing late fall applied, surface applied compared to incorporated, and you notice there's a lot lower phosphorus risk of phosphorus loss. Next slide. If we do the same thing for a solid beef manure, fall applied for solid manure is generally better because solid manure is more organic nitrogen, slower release, so we get more availability when it's applied in the fall, especially with a cover crop. If it's surface applied compared to incorporated, again, we've got a higher risk of phosphorus loss. Next slide. if we go to that nutrient balance and we break open the individual crops, I showed you that 3-year balance that's on the top of each of the field management plans. If there's a flag present, and that means if there's something that's being done that's a high risk, you'll see that icon that says flags present. And if I break it open, you can see that it's based on the fall application of manure and not incorporated. And if you look on that icon, the phosphorus index just gives an idea of, okay, next slide.
There it is.
Okay, again. So it gives, it shows where that risk is, and it shows what is the risk from just field characteristics like slope, soil type, soil test value, and then what is the risk based on our application type and management details. We also have other icons, information icon in the green. It basically gives what is the credit of manure that was applied previously. The triangle, agronomic balance, it might say you've got phosphorus that's been added in basically more than what you need for the crop. That's might be okay based on the whole rotation. And then our agronomic balance that says circle with a $sign, that we may need more potash for yield or for maintaining our soil test levels. That in a nutshell is a really quick overview of our resources available. But I guess the key message with this is it's a way to look at how is the nutrients that you're applying to the whole field balancing over time. And it's an indication of how efficient is the nutrient management plan. If you've got questions, we had that resources page that Mel is going to send out later, and you're welcome to email or send any of us in OMAFRA that are working with this software tool questions anytime.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christine. I told you all to hold on to your hats. I'm wondering, like, is the government keeping track of what we would put in there, or can we just kind of just play around with it?
It's totally confidential.
Just asking for a friend.
No, totally confidential. We don't get to see anything unless somebody shares it with us. And if you want to save your work, it's good to send to have an account and sign in, but all the work is confidential. We don't see any of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Any questions for Christine? It seems like that would be really helpful for like the interface with talking with your agronomist, because sometimes you wonder if they really value the manure like it should be when they're selling you fertilizer. So there's it's always a conversation.
Especially the micronutrients, and that's one of the comments that I would make. We were talking with the labs, and they've done some tests with us. And the sulfur in manure, for the most part, is elemental sulfur, which means it's a slow release sulfur. It has value. There's going to be sulfur there from most manure applications, but if you need a lot for the wheat or sulfur for alfalfa, it might not be enough.
Okay.
I've got a question for Christine then. Christine, I guess when using the database for manure analysis, can you give us the size? What's the scope of the database? They must have a lot of samples now that there should be some confidence that that a manure, a sow manure or a finishing manure would be fairly represent what's out there, right?
Yeah, we've got in the database there are for hog samples there are well over 2,000 samples. We're currently trying to put in the finisher option, the sow option, but right now it's by dry matter range. And if you're putting in your actual analysis, it will give you the database average for comparison so that you can tell if you're close or way out. And sometimes for some of those micronutrients, if something is way out from the average, it might be worth talking to a nutritionist to see if there's some solution or problem.
And if I could just add a factor that I didn't do in my presentation, on the nutrition side, I think the pork industry certainly, phytase is pretty well common practice now. That reduces the phosphorus in the feeds. And I think a lot of farmers now use an amino acid program. So we replace some of our soy meal with more specific amino acids. I think that all contributes to to less is more in the nutrients, in the manure.
Yeah, and the database is a good place to start if you don't have a manure analysis. But ideally, you start with that database and then take a manure analysis at the time that the manure is being applied to the field, and then go back and fine tune. And that's really your best option. Your own manure sample results are going to be the best by far. But taking a sample from an unagitated pit is probably not the best solution.
I would agree. And so lately I've got this pail with a string on there, and the way I sample now, I don't know what other people do, is that as you're putting it on the field, you go walk along by the drag hose guy, and because you're right, if you sample out of the pit, it's a bit of a crapshoot as to how well it was stirred and what level you're at. So I found the best way is a little pail and a rope, and you might get your boots dirty, but do that for an afternoon, and in my mind, that fairly represents what you're putting on the field, eh?
I use a coffee container and a hockey stick, duct tape to it.
I'm also intrigued with Harvest Lab and the idea that they could get a sense of what the nutrients are on the fly. And has anyone, I guess it's really new, but has anyone had experience with that?
It's a cool tool, and I think it has real potential. But the thing to keep in mind is it's giving you an average of the nutrients applied, not the available nutrients.
Yeah.
So it requires some calibration, and it's not calibrated to Ontario standards, but we're looking at working with them, or John Lozon is actually, and we're going to have more of that at the Manure Expo this year.
Oh yeah, you need to plug the Manure Expo. That's something we haven't done because we're never sure if it's going to happen in real life.
Next week is a decision.
Oh, is it?
It'll go for sure. It's just, will it be virtual, or will it be a real live event, or will it be a combination?
Yeah. Sure be nice to see everyone again. Calvin's put in the chat that finds OMAFRA's average value is pretty close. But when you test individual barns is even better. Yeah. And if you and feel free to unmute yourself. You can just, this is a free for all just for a little while. So chime in, everyone. I'm loving all these hacks for how to get a good sample.
Everyone's giving away the patents on their sampling.
Yeah,
strategies.
no kidding. It's like, what? Welded, just for the sake of people watching later, Dirk says, I welded a stub on my tanker and put a stainless ball valve on it straight into a sample jar. No mess.
Boots required then. Hey, no boots required then, likely, eh?
No, no.
Or rain suit.
Wim says we made a valve at the bottom end of the fill pipe, so every load you squirt a bit in the pail.
I love it.
Yeah.
Earlier on, I saw a lot of comments around the applying manure with the drag hose in the standing crop.
Yeah.
Certainly intrigued by that. Has anybody tried the tanker? I guess there's lots of good farmers out. Has anybody tried tankering into standing corn and had success, or is that another option for people? I'm interested in how that may or may not work.
There's more and more systems in place. The one that's in the picture behind me is one that is just being developed, and they've got the reel right on. Well, no, that's not a tanker, obviously, but there are tankers going in. The hardest thing with the tanker is getting from one end of the field to the next, and having the rate to finish. But you've got a little bit more options to go in longer than the 4-leaf stage.
Can you move away again, Chris? Just kidding.
And I'd like to make a comment on something that I think it was Cliff said, and it was just around the tools that he saw in Europe. There has been some tried here, the Vries with the shoes, and most of it was into hay crops, and hay crops and wheat crops. Did a beautiful job. The other one that I think has a lot of potential into standing crops is the Dribble Bar. Again, you've got the narrow 10 to 15 inch spacings. The European model is cool, but it's being adapted by some of the OPACA custom applicators, and they're building tools that have less plugging well, hopefully less plugging. But I think it takes less horsepower. You can get more manure on in an hour, and if it's right at the surface, you're getting very little loss from less from volatilization, but none of that drift, and you're placing it in narrower bands, so there's quicker infiltration. I find that the biggest losses with nitrogen from manure application, especially in standing crops like hay, is where you get ponding or pooling of some of those nutrients because the splash plate isn't doing an even enough job. And in those cases, that ammonia has gone really quickly. But if you can get infiltration fairly quickly, or if you've got canopy to stop some of that volatilization, you're making better use of that nitrogen. Those tools are coming. They've been too expensive, but as people value the manure more, there's more and more of those tools being developed. And just on another note, it's really nice to see people valuing the manure more and looking at opportunities in the crop rotation during the growing season, as opposed to just getting rid of it whenever there's the opportunity. So I've seen a lot more people looking at how can I plan my manure applications for more time during the year and optimize my crop rotation so that I can utilize that manure better. And we've heard a lot of people making that comment today.
Yeah. I was checking to see if Jake Cranbrink was on the call because I know he side dressed some hog manure from a tanker into corn as well as he was putting on the cover crop. Once he tried to put it within the manure, but then he just started to broadcast off the back. Made a bit more sense. Yeah.
Jake has internet issues, so that's why he's not on.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, he'll be glad that I plugged him.
Mel, there has been, and John, there has been going back, a neighbor of my father's, George Winnicky, when he used to own, or when he was still around, he used to be it was his standard practice to plant his corn and then side dress the sow manure into the standing corn, even up to it seemed to be almost too high in my mind, but he used to do it, and the corn was even beyond 6 leaf stage, and he'd go in there and side dress the corn, and that corn would just turn green and take off like crazy. Now he did lose a bunch of his stand on the headlands. The damage was pretty significant, but boy, that corn just took off and grew like gangbusters after he was done, and the damage there was very minimal damage, but he had narrow row tires on his tankers to do it though, and he had different tires on it, and there was a Van Bakel over by Kincora that has done it. I don't know whether he's still doing it, but when I was on the road selling for the co-op, that was his practice too, was to do side dressing his manure, hog manure as well. So it has been done and done very successfully.
Yeah.
Glenn Arnold, he's done some side-by-sides for years and years, and I think his average bushel gain was 26 bushels per acre from putting the manure on after the corn was up, and that was with tanker and drag hose.
Wow.
He's done work on that.
Yeah. And I do remember the year I saw Jake doing it, his headlands were just in grass. So he didn't have that trampling issue that year. Was there, Martin, do you have a question there?
No, we've applied manure in standing corn. We've done it years ago. We did it in OMAFRA test years ago with Noon on his tanker and tried to inject. It was back in the days when you still had shanks. Trying to get shanks to go into no-till is a problem. Bigger problem is trying to get shanks to go into 20-inch no-till corn, which is what we were doing at the time. And so we ended up dribbling that eventually on top between the rows, but it's time consuming. We had a 4,500 gallon tanker, duals on the tanker to go through 20-inch rows, which would line up with the tractor. But you ended up going end to field to end of field. A lot of driving because you're in one end and out the other.
Yeah.
And the headlands where you drove down was pretty near right off the 20 feet that we drove up and down. Manure application was good, but it's just timing. It took almost 2 weeks to get the job done.
Wow.
Chris, I have a question for you. Thinking of using a grassland injector in winter wheat in the spring versus just surface applying it, how much more nitrogen do you think you'd get? Only looking at the nitrogen, how much more of the nitrogen would you get if you're injecting it?
That's a good question.
With something that you can do in a standing crop, like a grassland injector.
Yeah, it would be significant. You would get close to probably 90% of the ammonium because it's not being lost to volatilization from surface applied. Yeah, it'd be significant. I'd say probably in that 90% as opposed to surface applied, it'd probably 40% or less. And if you try it in AgriSuite, it'll show you. Just
Yeah.
one other comment that I want to make though is with the nitrogen availability, pH is one that we found is a big factor. And so since we've studied digestate and Listergrow that both have very high pHs, I've been doing pHs on a lot of manure types. And hog manure, it's all over the map. There's some people that have pH in manure that's close to 7, some that's over 8. People that have manure that has pH of over 8 and it's being surface applied and not incorporated for 5 days, you're losing a significant amount of that ammonium without really realizing it. And AgriSuite doesn't take into consideration pH at this point.
Excellent. Well, we've only got a few minutes left, so I really want to hear from Angie Straathof. And Soil and Crop has got a lot of manure trials that are going to be running in this on-farm program. So this is an opportunity to hear what they're planning on doing, and yeah, take it away, Angie.
Great, thanks, Mel. Hi, everyone. Great to be here this morning. I am just going to put all my cards on the table and admit that hogs are definitely the commodity I know least about. So I have learned a lot this morning. I'm from a dairy farm myself, but I've learned a lot this morning, except I didn't actually learn what the pork shop was, Cliff. I'm really, really curious now what that's all about. So I'm going to
come see it.
Great. So I'm the program director at Ontario Soil and Crop. I've been with them for a little over 2 years now. I manage the team that runs the cost share delivery programs, but also the on-farm applied research program that I'm going to tell you about this morning. So on-farm, we just finished our first full year of the program. It is a Canadian Agricultural Partnership funded applied research program that looks at trials across Ontario fields, like real on-farm, run by farmers, working with researchers, real on-farm trials. So I don't have any data to show you from our first year of the program yet, but I really want to give you an insight into what's to come and what the research priorities for the trials that we're trying are. So just to give you a taste of the meat and potatoes of on-farm, it's really all about the connection of these 3 pillars. We want to see how water quality, especially water quality that flows into the Lake Erie Basin, is impacted by soil health and in-field soil health practices, and how they're changed or modified by stacking or implementing or altering best management practices. And we really want to focus on engagement as well. So we know that the most effective learning tool at farmers' disposal is other farmers. So we're really prioritizing how we can equip our farmer cooperator sites with good tools to share the news about what they're learning in their field trials. We also are hoping to partner with organizations like OPACA and other farm organizations across the province to really make this like a long-term, self-sustaining and well-branded source of information and network of demonstration farms into the future. So lots of big goals for this program, but just based on the successes of the first year, I think we're all heading in the right direction with it. So just giving you a sense of where we're looking at, the yellow dots that you see on this map are the in-field soil health trials, where we're applying 3 to 5 best management practices at each site in strips. And the orange dots you see there are field trials that are adjacent to surface water, where we have water quality and flow rate monitoring devices installed at each of those sites. And those are flowing into the top 3 dots going into Lake Huron, and those bottom 4 sites go into the western basin of Lake Erie. So again, like connecting what we're finding going on in fields with soil health with mitigation of nutrient loading into surface water. Just kind of pointing out like the regions that we've clustered the sites into. They do spread pretty far east, which is exciting for me. I'm from Renfrew County in Eastern Ontario, so it's nice to see some things head out that way. And it was really a point of the researchers and the soil resource group, who the consultancy we work with to set up these trials, and OSCIA and OMAFRA's soil team, to get a good diversity in soil types that are being measured in this program, but also in commodities represented. So with that being said, this is kind of the range in livestock versus cash crop operations we have across the province in each of those 5 regions that I mentioned. The good news for folks on this line is we do have a hog farm in the trial. It's in West Carleton, just west of Ottawa. And the other livestock operations are using on-farm source livestock, but a lot of the cash crops are also looking at applications of biosolids or municipally sourced compost. So not just livestock operations are looking at organic matter management, which is why the timing matters is really relevant to those sites as well. So the BMPs that we're looking at in combination at any of those sites would be cover crops, organic amendments, and some form of reduced tillage. So any of those practices are going to depend on what the farmer was already doing at that site to begin with, what their comfort level was in implementing it on the strips, like maybe based on the equipment they had on hand or where they were in their rotation. But a lot of the treatments are just meant to push the envelope of what they were comfortable with their practices, and also where the recommendations of Ontario's soil health and conservation strategy are pointing us. So the field season that we just wrapped up at the end of 2020 really established all the baseline soil properties at each site and in each strip. So we just skipping ahead here to show you what we measured for those baseline properties, soil fertility, and that those measurements helped determine the application rates at each site, but also where the farmers were in the rotation. And the baseline properties of texture, drainage class, pH, kind of all those like classic soil indicators are really needed in this program because they're being combined with more modern soil health indicators that really get into what's going on with the biology of those soils. So we're looking at indicators of carbon cycling and carbon storage, and how soil microorganisms are being influenced by the BMPs as well. So it's really neat in that regard. Sorry for bouncing around there, but I'll just show you the types of treatments that we're looking at each of the sites. So I've highlighted here the ones where we are applying organic amendments in different combinations with cover crops. Most of the sites you'll see from the 2020 crop column there were at the wheat stage in the corn, soybean, wheat rotation. So most of the organic matter was applied after that wheat harvest in late summer. So again, like a good combination of the organic matter resources that they had on farm. And if you just look at the bottom, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but site 24 there is our hog manure site just west of Ottawa. So this was kind of the biggest achievement of the first year of the program, just actually getting the sites surveyed, characterized, identified, getting the cooperators on board. They're all fantastic and excited to be in the program. And then implementing the BMPs and getting the first year really underway. So we'll repeat all the measurements that we took in year 1 of the program, in year 3 of the program as well. And another resource I wanted to point you in the direction of this morning is an app that's been developed by OMAFRA and OSCIA and Fertilizer Canada, called Soil Test Manager. It is similar to AgriSuite in that it will it kind of point you in the direction of where your nutrients are headed and how to kind of best maximize efficiency of those. But it's using soil test results, and it links those for our nutrient stewardship, especially for nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer. So you can, same as AgriSuite, it's all free, it's all confidential. You can go and play around with it, but it'll really give you a sense of how to interpret your soil test results and kind of translate those into planning and practice in fields. And finally, the other set of resources I'll point you to this morning is Ontario Soil and Crops Applied Research website. So this is kind of a newly launched site that houses all of the crop advances projects that OMAFRA researchers have been working with soil and crop members on, including past Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects that are on-farm research trials looking at projects that local and regional associations have conducted with OMAFRA researchers. So lots to explore there. There's lots of different categories. I guess most relevant one for this session would be soils. There's a lot of different organic amendment trials that have been conducted. They go back to maybe 15 years. There's lots of results to make your way through. So I'll leave it at that because I know you've taken a lot in this morning. Thanks again to Mel and to OPACA and Timing Matters for having us this morning. There's lots of ways you can stay in touch with Soil and Crop and learn more about the on-farm program listed there. But I'm also happy to answer any questions if we have time for that this morning. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Angie. Are there any questions on just on the on-farm project? We still have a few minutes left. You're still sharing your screen? Oh, there we go. Yeah. Now I can see everyone again.
Sorry.
No, this is great. Any last questions before we take off for the day? I also want to point out that Jeff Bannerman is really making sure that we tackle this foam issue, and said that there's from Ecolab, there's several different anti-foam agents that could be purchased if you want to have a look at that.
I got one question for Cliff I didn't get to ask earlier on. I guess, Cliff, we both agreed that compaction is a big issue, I guess. So when your customers call you in the spring, how does that discussion go about, because you've got a whole list of customers, I'm sure, that need your attention, and everybody thinks you're it's the only job they got to do is theirs. So how do you balance off the I'd like you here today with the weather conditions, with the equipment you've got, I guess?
Right now, any spring application, we're filled up. We can't do any more. We have to service our customers in that way. Without buying another set of equipment, it's just impossible to do more. Rule of thumb that we use, it almost has to be fit to plant before you can go on with a tank.
And that's my observations in my part of the world here, that there's too many people that should go fishing or do something else for a day or two before they go. And then if you're in an area with heavier soil, sometimes you're not rewarded because that next shower comes along and the clock starts over again.
Yep.
And that's why, just like Christine mentioned, finding ways to apply manure and spread out that window, it's something we need to look at very, very much into different crops, etc.
Yep. And it's neat to see all of this group here, everybody's how there's lots of work going on in that area.
Yeah.
I was just looking through my notes a little bit here, and one thing I forgot to mention that I brought back from Agritechnica is some of the technology that is changing, such as running sensors on manure tanks that adjust your tire inflation pressure according to the weight you're carrying. And there's also a company that has an ultrasonic sensor in the tire that measures how much your tire is deflecting. So that's how they're doing that. So to me, it's very exciting things.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because drag hose came up many times in the conversation today, and I don't know what 20 years ago that was maybe the new technology. Maybe it's 25 now. I don't remember, but when I started farming, that wasn't an option. And some innovative farmers took the irrigation system and figured out how to make it work, right?
And I don't know if you've noticed or if you know the company Yield 360, they introduced their rain system this just recently here, and I thought to myself, man, if you could pump manure through the rain, that would be pretty awesome. So that's basically a robotic irrigator is what it is that goes through your cornfield.
Oh, wow. It'll be interesting to see what the future brings. Considering that we're no one can travel anywhere, we're wondering if we could do OPACA Technica, which is bring all the European innovation onto a Zoom call like this in the summer. So if you're interested, let us know.
Mel, question on we're drag hosing for the most part of our manure.
Yeah.
First year we had a splash plate. Then I went to a distributor that's just dribbling it onto the ground. We call it a dribble bar. A lot less smell. Has anybody got any numbers on there's less volatilization of the nitrogen probably. Has anybody got numbers on what the difference would be between dribbling it on top of the ground versus splash plating it on top of the ground?
There's significant difference, but I would love to do some studies on it. So Martin, if you want, we'll measure it in the spring.
I wonder if there's like a smellometer that's a direct correlation with the volatilization.
They're definitely with the splash plate.
Yeah.
We were doing sampling in a field next to where, this is years ago, but next to where manure was being applied with the splash plate, and those fine droplets on a windy day, the next day when we were doing laundry, I could smell the manure.
Wow.
There's definitely lots of hearsay. Nosimeters, I don't know.
We'll bring it to OPACA Technica.
There was one question about the DDG syrup or the DDG steepate.
Yeah.
And so I looked up this sample, and so one of the samples was about 37% dry matter. And it had 13 pounds. This is based on late fall application incorporated. 13 pounds of nitrogen, 20 pounds of phosphorus, and 18 pounds of potash. Pretty nice balance between the potash and the phosphorus on all three samples that I took.
Nice.
That is the manure from the place that's using that ingredient?
That came right from the ethanol plant in Aylmer when Don was issuing, we were looking at land application.
That's raw then. That's okay.
Probably.
That's what it actually.
One comment about splash plates. I'm not sure. I don't have experience with multiple splash plates on a irrigation bar, but a splash plate behind a manure tanker, although we do use them, it's scary. You might not want to measure how accurately you're applying. It might be information you don't want to know.
Calvin echoes, splash plates are terrible. A question about using additives to reduce the smell. But I imagine, like, if you can smell it, you've lost it. So anything that's reducing the smell is probably better for the environment, better for the soil as well. Any miracle? on that front for all your neighbors. Doug's got a comment here saying, great meeting. Thank you, Doug, and thank you for attending. But remembering back to the days of using irrigation guns, that's how my dad got into custom work, was applying with those irrigation guns. They used to be my sprinkler growing up when I was a kid too. Well, we would use a clean one, hopefully. But applying rates at inches per acre and just reflecting on how far we've come and how conscientious farmers are being, and it's such a good news story, and I just hope that we can get that out to the public too. Dribble bar. What make dribble bar do you have, Martin? Question from Calvin. And then we'll wrap this up because you probably have lunch to eat.
Yeah, it was homemade. Some guy custom made one for himself. So it is 60 feet wide. There's a hose every 9 inches thereabouts. Yeah, they took some of the engineering problems they had at the start with the wrong size plates in it for even distribution, but it's reasonably good for even distribution.
Oh, and Dennis is saying we've used, oh shoot, there's so much blown up in the chat here. Guys, unmute yourself. Farm for profit additive, less crusting, less flies in the barn. Keith, oh, manure digester. Again, back to the foam. Awesome. Okay, well, with that, thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers. You did a great job. Thank you, Andy, John, Cliff, Angie, and Chris for giving your time to present. And thank you all for joining and contributing to a great conversation. And we will make this recording available at the same website that you registered. But yeah, just thanks so much, and keep up the great work. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and have a lovely lunch.